So the UK elections now entering their final stages. The polls are just a couple of days away, but on the ground right now, India Today Global has Geeta Mohan on the ground. Could you tell us a little bit about where you are right now and what the mood is in the UK right now?
Campaign headquarters. This is exactly where all the campaign strategy, management, what needs to go where actually is happening or has been happening for a while now. Shashank, we know that the country was not really prepared for such an early election. They thought they still had time, but I suppose the headquarters over here certainly knew a little more when Prime Minister Sunak came out and announced his announced the early elections, the snap elections. But how do things stack up? We've been going around, not just the city of London, but also to the outskirts and primarily to Harrow and to Wembley as well, which have a huge Indian community population. And 35% in Harrow alone clearly shows why Bob Blackman really engages the Indian community the way he does. And so does Barry Gardner in Brent, now West, earlier North, in Wembley. So we are looking at a lot of these MPs wooing the Indian voters, the Indian votes. So did Sunak and Starmer when they went into all those temples, wooing the Hindu vote bank especially. But does that really translate into much? Now, we do know that conservatives have a huge problem. Shashank and I have been, again, going around talking to people over here, especially Brits, not just Indian Brits, but Brits who have been talking about immigration being a problem. We spoke to some, we'll play out those sound bites for you as well. We spoke to some who actually said immigration is a problem, handling of the economy is a problem. And so it does not look good for the conservatives. But some of the conservative sitting MPs want to believe that the pollsters are actually not accurate, and that while Labour might have it better, it might not be as good as the polls are making the country believe. But we do have Amandeep Singh Bogle over here, who is going to join us, a conservative himself, and also hopeful things might work out for the conservatives to a certain extent. Let's see what he has to say on the fact that on the ground, when we went around talking to people, it doesn't seem like they're happy with the conservatives.
Well, look, we've had 14 years of time to deliver conservative policies which we've promised manifesto after manifesto. And I think, yes, as Prime Minister Rishi Sunak himself has said, that he can understand a lot of the frustration with the Conservative Party and Conservative government that the British people have. But at the same time, what the British people are crying out for are conservatism, conservative ideas.
I hope, Shashank, I hope you're getting this.
Absolutely.
You know, he keeps saying this, and this is going to be important through the theme of a lot of conservatives saying conservatism rather than just conservatives.
Well, look at this way. I mean, we've had 14 years of Conservative Party manifestos promising, for example, to reduce migration to the tens of thousands. And yet the Conservative government has delivered the highest migration in our UK history last year of 750,000 people net. And again, you know, if we are promising that, we ought to be delivering it. And that's what people want. And of course, the Labour Party, seems to be looking to be a government of no alternative. Rather than a government of choice. It's the surge to reform, which are promising many of the same manifesto items the Conservative Party has promised in the last 5 elections.
That's a significant statement he makes, Shashank, and maybe you know. After talking about conservatism, the fact that he's gone, and he's also talking about how conservatives have not done enough for when it comes to illegal immigration per se.
Per se, yes.
But Aman, which brings me to the question, is then Nigel Farage really slicing into the conservative vote bank? Because this is exactly what most of the conservatives who are upset with the Conservative Party and Sunak administration are now saying. They're saying they don't have an option to go to Labour. So is it Nigel Farage?
Well, in many cases, it is. And we've seen appeal after appeal from many Conservative candidates across the country of people who are thinking of voting reform to come back to us to make sure that we don't have not just 5 years, but 20 years of a probable Labour government. I mean, let's not forget, Labour wants to give 16-year-olds the right to vote, foreign citizens the right to vote, prisoners the right to vote. But more than that, in anything, I mean, look, I would argue that Britain is inherently a conservative country. We saw that in 5 successive elections. Boris, for example, in 19 received the biggest conservative majority since Lady Margaret Thatcher. And there was a reason for that. They wanted him to implement what the Conservatives have been promising.
But again, like you said, you're saying 16-year-old is what Labour now wants as the threshold for voting rights.
Yes.
Maybe that's because they have been able to capture the youth imagination of the youth.
On the contrary,
a lot of youth who swaying the Labour way. Is that what is happening? And which is why they want to capture more votes by reducing the age?
Well, I guess they do. But on the contrary, we've seen a certain surge amongst the British youth for reform. And the reason is quite simple, because let's be honest.
What do you mean by reform?
By reform UK, by Nigel Farage, very simple reason. Who's going to make you want to be able to afford to be able to buy a house, to raise a family, as a young person, to build a life for yourself? And those are the key questions that British youth want to ask. And it's not necessarily that Labour have the answers for that. Those are conservative answers. And again, it is conservatism with a small c that people are seeking out to be. Whether it's building enough houses to go around, so that the median average house price is not £300,000 above the reach of the average young person. So all those things matter to young people.
Do you think the campaign office over here got a lot of things wrong, including snap elections?
Well, I think, look, the Conservative campaign headquarters has a tremendous amount of staff who worked very hard over the many campaigns we have fought over the last few years. And they've worked very hard to deliver for Conservative Party. But I think a lot of people were caught off chance that this election was a snap election that was called by the Prime Minister. A lot of people were not expecting it, including a lot of MPs. Having said that, I think, again, this place behind me has a lot of people in it that have worked their socks off to deliver something as an option on ballot papers for the average British person. But having said that, again, the British people want a small conservative option on their ballot paper. And whether they are looking to our candidates as conservative candidates or Reform UK candidates, again, highlights that point that Britain is inherently a conservative nation that wants to conserve its traditions and conserve what is very much the essence of being British.
Before I toss it back to Shashank, one very important aspect during this election might not be a national agenda for the UK, but certainly from where we sit and look at this election, polarization, the less violence that we saw between Hindus and Muslims, Khalistani extremism. What's your reading on how these really stack up for either the Conservatives or the Labour?
Well, look, we've seen a lot of sectarianism come into British politics over the last year, whether it's driven by the polarization over Gaza versus Israel and a plethora of other things. The bottom line is that we have a certain amount of forces within British politics that have come in, and they have polarized primarily, I would argue, a lot of the British Pakistani population in wanting to vote along sectarian lines. We saw that in the West Midlands mayoralty elections. We saw that in some of the local elections 2 months ago. And again, this creep of foreign politics and foreign disputes and foreign problems, I would argue, that has creeped into British politics is a matter of concern. After all, what matters to most British people is the matter of taxation. Who's going to provide good quality school places for their children? And of course, who's going to provide them better public services? And most of all, who's going to provide them with affordable housing?
Is the country prepared? Is the country ready to actually elect a man of color?
Well, we've already seen.
Or an Asian or an Indian origin man. Is the country... No, that was not a direct election. So this is the first time Rishi Sunak is actually going to the people.
Well,
is the country prepared?
Well, I don't think the country is electing someone simply because of the color of their skin.
Really?
Not at all. They're electing someone because of what they want the party government to deliver. And that is reduced immigration, economic competence and delivering opportunities to level up those communities who have been left behind. Prime Minister Boris Johnson promised that, and Prime Minister Rishi Sunak, as his Chancellor, was trying to help deliver that when he was Chancellor before the pandemic and during the pandemic. And let's not forget, that's the other thing. This pandemic has taken a huge toll on the British economy, on the way things have worked out. And let's not forget also the Ukraine and Russia. It's had a huge impact on the British economy and the way we've tried to support Ukrainian freedom and Ukrainian sovereignty.
Also, maybe how the voter is thinking, because a lot of them have started questioning these wars, whether it's Russia, Ukraine, or Israel, Hamas, and whether it really bodes well for the British economy. Shashank, again, a lot of people over here that we've been speaking to say in the conservative camp, in fact, even in the Indian community camp, who might be voting Labour, but they are saying that Rishi Sunak did inherit power or the seat at a very wrong time. Things were anyway not looking good for Britain, so it was a very difficult time it was a very difficult time for Rishi Sunak. Having said that, while they're rooting, the Indian community primarily largely rooting for Rishi Sunak, things certainly look very difficult for the Conservatives, because their ideas are not carrying through. Their agenda certainly not carrying through. Their campaigns not really reaching the masses the way the Conservatives would want it to.
Right.
Well, I'd agree with a lot of what you have to say, but I would also argue that, again, the country has been seeking those small C conservative ideas to address the problems that this country is facing. And again, it's a lack of delivery that has been the issue more than the solutions themselves.
Also, it's not a Tina factor. There is no alternative over here, because it does seem like they hate Conservatives more than they love Labour. So it's not the other way around, where there is no alternative, so they have to go to Conservatives. It's just that they're so tired that they might not vote Conservatives and choose to vote Labour. That's how difficult things are looking for Conservatives.
Right? Well, as I said, Geeta, I mean, this looks to be a government of no intent, where people are not voting. They have no love for Keir Starmer. I mean, just yesterday he said that he wouldn't be a 24/7 Prime Minister. I mean, I was arguing last night on TV.
So he slipped it. It's actually, there is no alternative for, if not the Labour, then no one else.
I mean, yes. I mean, look at it this way. I mean, Keir Starmer yesterday made it very clear that he would not be a 24-hour Prime Minister. He said that he was clock off every Friday at 6 o'clock. I mean, we know, for example, that Prime Minister maybe in India works 16-hour days to serve the people of India. And that is the gold standard of what we want to be our British Prime Minister. So it's not as there's an extreme love for Keir Starmer and what he is. Let's not forget, he's the same man who knocked on doors, delivered leaflets, and wanted the communist that was Jeremy Corbyn, the British bashing, Hamas loving, India hating man that was wanting to be Prime Minister 2 times, not once, twice. So what has changed? That's the question. So it looks to be a government of no alternative rather than a government of loving.
Okay, so not a Tina factor for the incumbent, but rather for the opposition. And it does seem like the opposition are going to have it quite smooth. But some of them over here that we're speaking with, and we will be putting those interviews out as well, actually say that it might not be as good for the Labour as the pollsters are suggesting.
Right. No, if I may ask one question myself to Amandeep, on this question of, there's a suggestion being made that the Conservative Party is so divided internally on questions of immigration. Just something that we've covered here is on student visas, for example. One part of the party thinks that it's a good idea to have graduate student visas for skilled students coming from around the world. Some parts of the party think it's just not a good idea. So it just
okay, you're breaking up, Shashank. Could you just repeat the question, please?
Sure, absolutely. My question is very simple, and let me know if you can't hear me. The very simple question I have is, wouldn't the Conservatives perhaps benefit from a spell in opposition? They seem to have have had a very difficult time sort of unifying the party. They seem to be slightly more extreme wings of the party on questions of economic reform, on taxation, on immigration. Would it not perhaps benefit the Conservative Party to spend a little time in opposition and figure out what their message is?
That's a good question. Aman, the question over here, Shashank wants to know, is whether if it'll be better for the Conservatives after 14 years to just sit in the opposition and maybe allow the other side to handle all these areas of crises?
Well, look at it this way, Geeta and Shashank, and your viewers at India Today. I would say the Conservative Unionist Party, the headquarters behind, and I'm a key member of it, we are the world's oldest and most successful political party for a reason, because we've been keen to deliver on the priorities of the British people. And yes, if that means that we have to sort of go away and reinvent or sort of reorientate ourselves as to what conservatism really means for the UK, then that's what it might have to be. But a lot of it will mean as to which are the MPs that get re-elected. Will it be Suella Braverman? Will it be Tom Tugendhat? Will it be a handful of others? I mean, these are questions that will be answered by the party after this Thursday. But in either case, as I keep repeating, Britain is an inherently conservative nation which wants conservative solutions to the problems it faces. And the problem.
So basically, Shashank, they don't really want to sit in the opposition. They'd rather sit. They'd rather form government.
Hold the reins of power again.
But I'm telling you, they should start preparing themselves. Ahmed, they should just start preparing themselves.
Well,
you should start preparing yourself.
Well, I'm absolutely prepared. I mean, I've been, for example, arguing that we need to tackle the threat of illegal economic migration head on as an immigrant myself. Every single illegal economic migrant is slapped in the face of every legal migrant, like myself, who has jumped through hoops and endless queues to make Britain their home through the right ways. So all these challenges that face Britain, they're no easy answers. And I'm quite determined that Labour aren't going to have the solutions either. And my expectation is that post Thursday, within the first 100 days of a Labour government, they're going to find that it's very difficult to actually govern. I mean, let's not forget, in the expected Labour cabinet, it's not many people that are going to have cabinet level government experience of having governed in the past. That's another thing.
What's your reading on how the illegal migration situation will look should Labour form government? Because we do know that the dinghies and boats will then not be stopped, or there is going to be no deterrent with the Rwanda plan.
I would argue that Labour would probably argue themselves that they will stop the dinghy runners, as I like to call them, for a simple reason. They're going to sign up to the European Union's pledge to take in 80 to 100,000 illegal economic migrants from the European Union who have crossed over on the Mediterranean illegally, willingly into the UK as part of some sort of deal. They want to renegotiate Brexit with the European Union. I mean, Keir Starmer, his underlings have been quite clear that they want to sign up to that deal, that the European Commission is pushing of welcoming open arms up to 100,000 illegal economic migrants from the EU, and that from Europe. And but let's not also forget what's happening in France as we speak. Last night we had the resurgence of Marine Le Pen, who I think is a shot in the arm for rediscovering French sovereignty and French nationalism and patriotism. And if that happens, if she becomes the French president in a week's time, well, that could throw a whole spanner into the European Commission's works, into what they want to do with all this endless amount of illegal economic migration.
Well, that's an important point he makes, Shashank, that should the Labour come to power over here, how illegal immigration looks today in terms of how it's being viewed to be tackled rather than being accepted is something that will change dramatically.
You know, if I could ask one question, just to press Amandeep on one of his points about the fact that, look, there's Keir Starmer, who is, of course, likely to become Prime Minister this week, has never actually served as a cabinet minister, neither has a lot of his front bench. But the question I have for him is, David Cameron and George Osborne, the people who led the Conservatives to power in 2010, had never served in cabinet themselves. Isn't the same thing true of the Conservatives in 2010 that he is now accusing Labour of?
Well, answer the fact that he also does not have the very same situation of experience and having.
On the contrary, I would argue that David Cameron in 2010 has still a very large number of senior Conservative politicals who had served in government in the previous administration, John Major, of Lady Thatcher in the 90s and late 90s. Whereas the truth is, what I'm hearing here in Westminster on the sort of rumour circuit is that David Lammy might not end up being the Foreign Secretary because he is divisive. He hates President Trump. I mean, let's be honest, it's quite likely that the US might elect President Trump back into the White House. would a Prime Minister Starmer want to have a David Lammy Foreign Secretary who hates India? I mean, let's not forget, when Prime Minister Boris went to India in April 2022, David Lammy has certainly changed his colours now. He was in Delhi last month. But at the time, he said the Labour Party should not be doing any free trade agreement with India until we talk about its so-called supposed human rights record in Kashmir. So, and don't forget, David Lammy is the same man who put his signature to a rabid letter of Labour MP in 2019 after the abrogation of Article 370, bringing Kashmir into parity with the rest of India. So again, I think that sort of shows the quality or the lack of quality of the shadow Labour cabinet and the rest of it. I mean, Keir Starmer, I mean, is this a continuation of the same? You know, sort of he's going to set up 1,000 new Krangles. Is he going to serve as Prime Minister taking decisions, or is he going to delegate them to others?
But once you are in power and you do hold that position, I suppose you start learning like everyone else did on the job.
But that's the question, isn't it? Does he want to do that, or is he going to be beholden?
Does he not? I suppose he is fighting very hard for it.
Well, yes and no. I mean, we're still to be very clear on a number of his positions. He's a known fence sitter on the big issues of the day. For example, I'm not quite sure we can still define what it is to be a woman. I mean, that's a big question that we face in the West, is to define a woman and to protect the rights of women for being a woman.
That a woman can be defined the way she wants to be defined.
Well, that's the key question that the British people have
So
to contend with.
that's a conservative versus Labour. Rishi Sunak can come out and very clearly say, oh, if it's a she, it's a she, if it's a he, it's a he. But we are not going to get into that because we will recognize anyone as the person wants to be recognized.
Well, that's for the British people to decide and British people to deliver upon. But my key takeaway from this is that Keir Starmer has very little experience of what it means to be in government, let alone to be Prime Minister. But the key...
Well, he did really not fare that well in the last debate, Shashank. So if you go by how the country should be looking at debates and then maybe deciding, maybe Sunak did way better than Starmer.
In the last debate, yes.
In the last debate.
Indeed.
But I think it's just the country that has now decided. We can say all we want, we can discuss all we want, but I think the country, in a way, many of them have decided exactly which way they want to vote, and irrespective of what they see on channels or see us reporting. I think it no longer makes a difference.
Right. If I may ask one more question, just something that might be of interest to Indians here is that we just hit the streets today of Delhi and talked about how Indians look at Rishi Sunak. And
voice is breaking, Shashank. Could you just repeat the question?
Absolutely. Can you hear me right now? The basic question I wanted to ask was that we just hit the streets of Delhi today. We talked to people about how they look at Rishi Sunak, and one of the big things that come up is that, of course, he's the son-in-law of Narayana Murthy, someone who's extremely rich, richer than the king, a net worth approaching £1 billion, and that sort of wealth in a country that is suffering through an economic crisis makes him seem increasingly out of touch. There was this stunning word cloud that came out a while ago that basically showed what do the British people associate Rishi Sunak with most, and it was the word rich. So, it's a bit curious about how Indians seem to see this association with Narayana Murthy and wealth.
Rich, and also it did not go down well. Last time he was seen canvassing. They pointed out to the shoe he was wearing, the suit he was wearing, the clothes he was wearing.
Right. I would argue that that's mostly the lefty press in the UK. So obsessed with his shoe.
The lefty press.
Well, the left ones. But look, let's not forget that the vast majority of the Labour shadow cabinet is privately educated, multi-billionaires. I mean, look at Keir Starmer himself. He's a multi-millionaire. He's a metropolitan Liberal elite. He's a high-flying lawyer. There is nothing Labour about him. Let's be honest about that. I mean, the vast majority of British people.
It is true, Shashank. A lot of the politicians we are looking at within Labour, within the Conservatives too, are rich, but none like Rishi Sunak.
Well, people
and
people want to know.
It's unfortunate that it's not something.
On the contrary, that the British nation is one of aspiration, and they look at their Prime Minister as someone who has helped himself make it in the real world who has experience of business, who has experience of creating wealth and prosperity, and they look at that as well as a role model. Well, why shouldn't somebody be able to create wealth for themselves and their family?
So ritual is not a bad thing. The fact that it's being heard, talked about, said a lot,
Most people,
and associated with Rishi Sunak.
not at all. Most people care about what he wants to deliver, and again, primarily what he has or has not been able to deliver.
There is truth to that, because a lot of them are holding Rishi Sunak responsible, irrespective of his wealth, whether he's been able to deliver or not. And most likely, the elections that we will be seeing on 4th of July, Shashank, will have to do with whether if the Conservatives and Sunak has been able to deliver or not.
Right.
Yeah.
Well, on that note, we'll leave you and Amandeep right in front of the Conservative Party headquarters. It's been a very, very interesting debate about the key issues that are defining the election. We'll keep you updated. We've had, interviews with members of Parliament or prospective members of Parliament, as well as you can see, in front of the Conservative Party headquarters with Amandeep Bhogal and Geeta Mohan. Thank you so much for watching India Today Global.